when one person is taking on the weight of the entire relationship, it's never going to work. Somebody, you have to show up, and yes, you want to be understanding, but you can't lose yourself.
Hey guys, and welcome to Little Black Book. You already know what time it is. We're talking to you guys today about Taraji P. Henson's talk about understanding love, and that love is understanding. Guys, if you're new to the channel, make sure you do me a favor. Make sure you like, you share, you subscribe. Click on the bell button for a notification of the what? Uploads, baby. And for those of you who are returnees, you got the minerals. You got the minerals. Don't forget to grab your merchandise. Mineral gang, you understand? Yeah, no long thing. Let's get into the video. So recently on the Breakfast Club, Charlemagne was interviewing Taraji P. Henson and a few other people, and they were having a conversation about love, trauma, and just general, like, you know, dating, etc. And I think there was an interesting part of conversation that was had between Taraji and Charlemagne and the rest of the crew. And the question was posed by Charlemagne about how people deal with trauma in a relationship and dealing with men who have trauma in a relationship. Now, if you guys have watched my channel, you know I've said previously that men need therapy, that you can't be without it, because the way that some of you behave is evident that you've been traumatized by what you've experienced in the past, and that trauma is causing you to behave in a certain way towards your partner that's not conducive to a healthy, long-lasting relationship or marriage. And so we get to find out that Taraji P. Henson actually has, she was in a relationship and it didn't work out. And I know she was very protective over the fact that she didn't want to say too much about the relationship. She made it very clear she's not going to say too much. But also as well, the way that she even discussed it, she made sure to, I guess, protect the previous partner that she was with, which I respect. So the question was posed obviously earlier on, and it was about dealing with trauma.
And how do sisters create a safe space for us to be vulnerable?
What was spoken about was very, very much a lot what we've been in keeping with what we've been speaking about, which is that creating a safe space is about vulnerability. It's about trust. It's about you being able to listen and understand. And I think that was one of the key things that came out. You listen to understand. But they said, obviously, love is about understanding. I would say, yes, love is about understanding, but it's the listening to understand, because we do love people. We do love them. And sometimes we want to understand, but we don't have the tools nor the resources to do this. And so one of the key things to do here is that in your relationship, you listen to understand. You ask questions to understand and not to kill. Now, it's very hard because sometimes we've got our own trauma to unpack. We've got our own pain we've got to unpack. And you might have done me dirty. You understand? And now I'm having to do the repair work and you're not doing it. And so this is where it becomes very difficult, where pride, ego starts to really show its ugly head, and where we start to realize why relationships can be so difficult, but also is why we need the agape love, God's love, in order to help us in these situations, to help us be reflective and actually say, hey, you know what, the same way that I'm doing you, it's the same way that I've done God. And if God can give me grace, I got to give you grace, right? And grace just means unmerited favor. Even though you didn't deserve it, your actions didn't show that you deserve this, still I'm going to give you this grace. I'm going to give you this love, because of the fact that love is about grace, is about mercy, and it's also about as well trying to understand the person that you're with in a relationship. And so the point that was made was love is understanding. And you know, it's something that we've been doing about. If you guys haven't followed us on a Tuesday night, guys, I'm telling you, we're gonna do this for a few more weeks before we go into Patreon, and it's gonna have to be, you know what I mean? But we're really having some really in-depth conversations around marriage and about the truth about relationships and the reality of these things. You know, the truth of the matter is that even at my tender age, understanding what love is, I'm still growing in that. Do you know what I mean? I'm not married, by the way, and there's another step even in marriage. I think there's a love that you.
And how do sisters create a safe space for us to be vulnerable?
Woo! Who want to go first on that? I'm gonna let you talk.
Long-standing love, your friends, your lovers, but there's a long-standing love which is built over time due to the fact that you have been in the trenches with that person day in and day out. But what I would say about love here is that understanding how God loves me, it allows me to understand how we're supposed to love one another, which is that the Bible says love covers a multitude of sins. And the difficulty here is that what kind of sins are we going to be forgiven? And what kind of sins are we going to be allowing to continue to progress in our relationships? And that's where it becomes very difficult, because many of us are like, well, I can't deal with that. That's not me. You understand? Because that doesn't run for me. And let's be honest, there are some things you just can't deal with. Let's be very, very frank. If you're looking to get into a long-standing relationship and a marriage, then you have to start thinking about, okay, I may not be able to work with certain things, but how do I get around this? What's the solution rather than just a problem? Because oftentimes when relationships break down, it's because there is no solution brought to the table. When a company fails, it's because they failed to change with the times and they failed to bring a solution to the time of problem. And so your relationship oftentimes also fail because we fail because obviously one person might not have been a good choice, number one. Number two, they're failing to heal from their trauma. Number three, they're refusing to do work. Number four, as well, in the process of your relationship, when there were problems, what were the solutions that were brought?
Taraji, now when you say things didn't work out, did y'all try to make it work?
And were you willing to compromise? Were you willing to sacrifice your pride of being right? Were you willing to sacrifice your position of being right to say, hey, if I'm right, we actually lose? Because that's one of the biggest things that we've been learning over the course of on a Tuesday nights at 7:30. Please, guys, you got to make sure you tune in for those because they're wavy. If you're always going to be right, you're going to be wrong. You're always going to be right. You're going to lose this relationship. You know what I mean? So I don't want to just talk about how to attain that person. We've got to talk about how you maintain that person. It's well and easy going to buy a car, but how do you maintain it? What are the things that are needed to keep this car going? And that's your relationship. And so that was what was spoken about with Taraji in that one. And then there was a situation that was spoken about, which is the pre-notion or the pre-thought, the assumption that is made, what's that term that says about making an ass of me if I assume or whatever, right? It's like we can assume because of what experiences we've had.
Really open up to you. But if you're going in with your own predetermined notions, what you're trying to get out of the conversation, what you want him to say or do or fix.
Like I've had many the arguments I've had with my missus. As I start to review them after we've had those arguments and after we've calmed down, I start to realize there were assumptions that were made. I felt like this, yes, and I was quite right to feel like this, but how did I communicate that to you? Did I communicate that to you in an assumption that you did this on purpose? Or did I communicate that in an assumption of, okay, I actually want to find out why did you do what you did? And how did you get to this viewpoint? How did you get this point? Because at the moment, the way you're talking about the situation hurts me, right? And so these are things that we have to get to a place of and not come with a pre-notion. But it happens in relationships all the time. And it's normal because we have not learned how to get out of that. So once you begin to learn, how do I get out of the pre-notion? How do I get out of the thinking that that I already know what they're going to come and say. I already know what their answer is. I already know why they did what they did. Once we can get out of that and you can start asking questions, again, it's your pride that's talking and it's your fear. Once you can get out of that and start to ask the why reasoning behind it, because if you ain't got the why reason as to why someone doesn't do something, you actually don't have the answer. Like, you don't actually have the genuine answer as to what's going on. So I would say to you, listen, look, one of the greatest things that I'm learning is that understand the why. If I can get to the why in business, we understand why business thrives, right? And the reason why they're alive and what they're here for. And if you look at if you talk about business, you hear the conversation around great businesses understand their why. Well, a great relationship will understand their why. Why did you do what you do? Why do I do what I do? Right? And that brings what? Understanding, clarity. And that clarity begins to allow us to have more grace. And so the point about the fact that these things are all we're talking about now are built upon the foundation of trust. You see, in relationships, the trust is weakened by actions that are made which begin to dig at that wall that you've built up. Okay, cheating, lying, stealing, not being totally honest, behavior that's a bit some way and inappropriate and stuff like that. There's so many different things that can take away that trust. And what's important is that you are building trust in your relationship, which means having real-time conversations, which means also as well, actually genuinely being able to
but the problem becomes if you don't have that foundation in the beginning. So I'm okay with everybody. First of all, no one's perfect.
Being able to you know actually have some deep conversations where I get to fully know you and you expose yourself to me. It's about that vulnerability again, yeah, and it's about asking those questions to try and find out what makes you tick, you know. And once you're getting those kind of conversations, once you're having those talks, once you're embedding those foundations in your relationship, what you're going to find is that it becomes a much more sturdy foundation to build upon, and that allows then for when you're having certain arguments to avoid certain topics, allows you to stop certain arguments because you know how the person's going to be and how they're going to react and why they may react that way. Again, you know, so it's important that you build that foundation by having conversation. You can't avoid this. Don't get involved with the sex. You have to avoid certain conversations. You have to get into certain conversations and avoid the sex. The sex is good. It's the cherry on the topping of the icing. Yes, it is important to build up the chemistry, okay, in the right relationship, baby, marriage. But it's important that you're building up those foundations and mentally stimulating each other's mind and understanding one another, so that when you do come to tough times, when sex just can't cut it no more, when you don't even want to have sex with that person because they've really pissed you off, what are you gonna do then? You know, there's a song that was going, I'll be your best friend. I want you around all the time. I don't know if that's the right lyrics, but you know what I'm saying? 50 Cent's best friend, right? You want the best friend in your relationship, and that comes through conversation. And so a point that was made by Taraji was
where we can both be our vulnerable selves, where we don't have to send a representative, because I trust if I fall, you're going to catch me.
Mm-hmm.
Those are things you build.
So powerful. She said, you know, I don't want to be sending in my representative to, you know, to the conversation and to the argument. Why would we send our representation to the argument? Well, you send a diplomat because you want to protect the main body person, right? You delegate. But the truth of the matter is, in a relationship, you cannot delegate yourself to the representative, and the representative just represents that your it's not your vulnerable self. It's the rib cage, not the heart. So we can see the rib cage, can't we? In a human being, we see the effects of the rib cage. We don't see the heart. Though we know the heart is there and we know it's pumping blood around a person because they're alive. But what you have to understand is sending the ribs to do what the heart's meant to do is where you will, I mean, it's called heart strings for a reason, not rib strings. You don't pull on my rib, you pull on my heart. And so therefore, it's my heart that needs to show up to the conversation, not my ribs. Now, the ribs' job is to protect. So when you show up with your ribs to the conversation, what you're doing is you're trying to protect yourself. You're trying to protect your real self, the vulnerable self. And we do that when we don't feel like we can fully trust a person not to stab us in the heart. Because we know at that point, when we show up without the representative, without the diplomat, without the ambassador, okay, when we show up there, that's our true self. If they take a knife to stab us there and then, that's us. And that's scary. That's pain. And so a lot of us are trying to avoid reoccurrences. It's natural because the natural mind, okay, doesn't want to go through the same processes it's gone in the past. If you've been traumatized or hurt in the past, the mind will tell you, this, remember this behavior, it led to this. A lot of it is self-defense tactics. Okay? All right, so we don't want to send a representative. So in that case, when it comes to relationships and the emotional safety, in order to gain that, we need to be able to say, hey, someone's got to take the first step and say, I'm going to take a risk here. I'm going to be vulnerable. I'm going to be emotionally available. And I'm going to have a conversation and listen, not just talk, but listen, and listen, not to respond, but to actually hear you and understand you and to deep you.
If you are actively dealing with your trauma, and a lot of times it's difficult, and I'm dedicated to the Black man, y'all. I just turned 50, and
it said, obviously, you know, you must be working on your trauma. And here's the thing about relationships: when someone is working on their trauma in relationships, you might outgrow that relationship because, one, it wasn't a great relationship. It was a relationship that was based on trauma, or two, your partner just isn't doing the work. They are happy to stay where they are, and unfortunately, you've outgrown them due to the fact that they don't want to overcome their trauma. They are traumatized by their trauma, and not only that, they have built their safety behind the rib cages. They are happy to be where they are. The walls are up and they're happy to be there because they don't want to take the risk of being hurt. So they don't want to move. Unfortunately, when your partner is beginning to move, that's a greater change. As the change begins to increase, there goes the relationship, because now the person is seeing, hearing, thinking, feeling different. And now your petty arguments that were originally were big arguments for both of you, now this becomes a stress on the person. Like, I don't want to deal with that. And now you're stressed because beforehand it was a petty argument that you'd both go toe to toe with, and now the person's like, I don't want to deal with that. And now you're angry at the fact that the person doesn't want to argue with you no more. You're hurt by the fact that you feel that they may be now looking down on you because they no longer argue in the same way. So it's important we understand this. The change and dealing with your trauma is important. Asking yourself, why do I feel the way I do, is so critical and important. Am I hurt? Am I fearful? Am I jealous? Have I had a past experience? What is it? Why do I feel the way I do? You know? And so, you know, Taraji says she tried that. She's dedicated to the black man.
And I'm dedicated to the black man, y'all. I just turned 50 and
wow.
You know, and I haven't said it yet, but it didn't work out. You know what?
She made a very key point, which I've been saying to you guys for a long time. Your partner isn't your therapist. Okay, they are not your therapist. They cannot be your therapist. Okay, they are also dealing with their own issues, and they're not in an objective position to be able to do so. You know, it's very hard to be objective when you're in the situation. Hence why when police people are doing fraud, if there's a friend or a partner or someone they know is involved in the case, they're taken off it. Why? Because it cannot be objective.
Taking it on yourself. And that's not a fair position for anybody to play in a relationship.
And therefore, emotion begins to lead. And therefore, logical choices that should be made are no longer made. And now they're made from emotion. Okay? And so I want to say this very last point as well. Because there was a point that I said obviously about didn't know about love is, but I want to make this point that Taraji made a good point, which is that you want to be understanding in this relationship. You want to be able to work with that person. You want to show them grace and love, but not to the point where it's abuse. Right? We don't deal with abuse in a relationship. That shouldn't be going on. We understand that some people are growing and some people are trying to change, but the abuse side of things, we can't accept that. It's we can't, and there may need to be a form of separation for a time and a period, or it may be permanent separation. But we cannot accept abuse verbally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, whichever you want to call it. We can't accept no abuse in these relationships. So, yeah, guys, I loved that conversation with Taraji P. Henson. I'll put a link down below in the description box. Guys, do me a favor, make sure you like, you share, you subscribe to this channel, and we're gonna have some more talks along the way as well. Appreciate you guys. Stay locked, stay loaded. More love.